In a 3D fighting world, Tekken is king. In this series of episodes, we'll first take a deep dive into the character's martial art. In a second, we will examine what techniques the character uses, as well as rate how well they represent their martial art. In the final episodes, we'll look at other games that feature that fighting style and compare techniques. I'm Young Fang, and welcome to my channel. The French. Those arrogant, pompous bastards. Did you know they have their own fighting style? Yes, these cultured, proud European versions of Americans have a style of kickboxing that is very brutal, but also quite French. Today's episode has us introduced to a fighting style's history and conception, as well as the character introducing the martial art to Tekken. Like many of you whose hearts were taken away by the seductive X-strap bikini-wearing Brazilian girl, I was surprised by her absence while scanning the Tekken 7 character roster. Chrissy Montero was a huge hit, and most players loved her upbeat personality and South American sex appeal. In many ways, it was a deep contrast to Eddie Gordo's dark quest for revenge. Yet, by Tekken 7 she was gone, and in her place was a darker, sexier, rougher kicker. Gone were those beautiful acrobatic flips and kicks from Capoeira, and in their place was a generic barrage of side kicks and roundhouses. We all know that Katarina was taught a unique style of fighting by her legal guardian, who was most likely a master of Savate himself, now reduced to a huge red mass of intelligible grunts. He kinda reminds me of that 1986 movie I saw as a young kid. Anyway, let me get back on track. Katarina Alves is a Savatier. Now, not everyone agrees that she practices an authentic style of Savate, and we will decide that in the next video, so please like, share, subscribe, and comment below on how well you think she represents Savate. Also, as you can see, I'm a tad bit inconsistent when it comes to uploading my videos, so hit that alarm bell to keep yourself posted on any new videos that I may release in the future. Savate Boxe Française is a unique style of kickboxing which is very distinct from the other forms. The Americans combined the basic kicks of Japanese and Korean karate with the punches of boxing, while Japanese kickboxing is more of a blend of boxing and Muay Thai. When most people hear the word martial arts, they probably think of let the bodies hit the Before November 1993, when most people heard the word martial art, they probably imagined kids and out-of-shape adults barefoot in their pajamas kicking and punching in unison, all while yelling at the top of their lungs. The martial art was probably one of the big three, of Taekwondo, Karate, or Kung Fu, all from East Asia. Even to the untrained eye, you can see quite a few differences in Savate. For one, it has an elegance to it, not unlike ballet. The kicks look powerful, but also controlled, and the fighters are far more mobile and faster, and they keep their shoes on. In fact, they wear special shoes when they fight. They also fight in what can only be described as a ballet unitard. Truth be told, the integral is an interesting outfit not everyone is a fan of. So yes, this is a European martial art. As we continue, you will see that Savate actually influenced a lot of other East Asian fighting styles. A round in boxing is usually 3 minutes, but Savate rounds are between 1:30 to 2 minutes in length. When attacking each other in the ring, Savateurs use most of the punches and kicks found in kickboxing. They are encouraged to maintain at least a 50-50 ratio between punches and kicks. Because of the rapid amount of kicks, Savateurs usually fight in a slightly farther range. Rather than trade blows in the middle of the ring, the French have turned Savate into the sweet science of kickboxing, along with a strong adherence to distance coming from fencing and balance and gracefulness coming from ballet. Attacks are usually set up through combinations and positioning, and Savateurs are actually quite agile and mobile. They'd rather circle around their opponents, dashing in and out, and hide their attacks and powerful kicks within combinations. Savate Boxe Française comes in 3 different flavors. Assault, a contest with light contact. Basically, the kicks and punches are controlled, light touches, and after the match points are tallied up, the judges decide the winner based on a combination of ringmanship, technique, and clean hits. After that, it starts to resemble its kickboxing cousin on the other side of the Atlantic more and more. Pre-combat is a full combat style with contestants donning a full protective gear such as shin guards and headgear. And finally, there is Combat Savate. No protection needed, just shoes, gloves, and the integrale. The fighter is allowed 3 paths to mastery. He or she can go the technical route or compete in the squared circle as a pro fighter. Finally, they have the choice of delving more into the art and becoming an instructor. Instead of belt colors, you can usually tell a Savateur's skill by the color of gloves that they use. To enter the ring, they must at least have been awarded the red gloves, but depending on the country and organization, results may vary. Savate Boxe Française is not the only way out there to bust some heads. There's also Savate Defense, a Savate style that goes back to its street fighting origins, incorporating more wrestling, bringing in different weapons, and throwing the rules of the rings out the window. Finally, do you think Taibo is the only form of cardio kickboxing out there? Well, think again, because for all of the New Year, New Me soccer moms out there, La Savate Formée is here for you. In mirrored rooms with Euro techno blazing in the background, Cardio Savate is there to get everyone in fighting shape, even if they don't want to fight. To call the history of Savate murky would be the understatement of the year. I can tell you that it's much older than you think. It's older than the ring sport of Muay Thai, Taekwondo, kickboxing, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and even Shotokan Karate. Imagine an army of Viscots facing off against a fearsome shadow of Huns. These warriors from the east use an exotic fighting style of straight and spinning kicks that leave a firm impression on the Viscots. As they settle down, they pass down these techniques until it evolves into a style of kicking and grappling and hand strikes. That sounds a little bit off, right? Okay, how about this? The Greeks developed boxing in their Olympic Games, but there's also another sport quite similar to MMA, known as pancreation. While these games faded and Greek influence gave way to the rise of Rome, these fighting techniques never did, and stayed in the hearts and genetic memories of the people of the Mediterranean. Okay, let's imagine a group of French sailors traveling to Orient, watching a class of students in deep practice of some traditional yet exotic kung fu style. The sailors do their best to imitate these impressive acrobatic attacks, and they bring them back to France. Let's remember that all forms of punching and kicking actually come from China, and more specifically, the Shaolin Temple.
This one.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man? Bro, I'm out, man. That nigga's tripping.
On the 22nd of August, 1791, the island of Saint-Domingue would experience a revolt that would later blossom into a full revolution. This would spell the end of the French colonial government there and start an unholy period of massacre and forced assimilation for many of the French left behind. Most European inhabitants of other French colonies, including the wealthy plantation owners, did not want another revolt on their hands, and naturally the sight of an organized group of able-bodied Africans, many of whom were former prisoners of war, sparring with each other while perfecting lethal martial art techniques, would not just be viewed with casual amusement. If they saw something like this, the training would cease and so would the games. This emphasis on high dangerous kicks hidden in games may have led to the creation of neo-martial art fighting styles hidden by smiles, acrobatics, drums, and circles, all accompanied by music and singing. Styles such as Capoeira in Brazil and Juego de Mani in Cuba are all possible results of these newer, friendlier games. What about another martial art from a small French-controlled island of Martinique, located ironically between Cuba and Brazil? Did these African games of high kicks and slaps influence the French sailors to develop their own games of Chausson in a small port city south of France? Or was it the opposite? Honestly, I don't know, but I find it fascinating and I promise to explore that in a later episode. What we do know is that the Savate Katarina uses is more of an eclectic blend of an indigenous mock style of combat known as the Boxe, encompassing Spain, Portugal, and France going as far back as the 1400s, a Greco-Roman or lutte parisienne, an old wrestling style destined to become an Olympic event one day, a gritty urban style of street fighting in Paris known locally as Savate, and finally, a fighting style of high kicks and acrobatics from the south known as Chausson. Now, let's look at the historical events that led up to the creation of Boxe Française Savate. In an era long forgotten, two men have just come to a disagreement. Whether by slap or verbal declaration, a challenge has been issued. The gauntlet has been thrown. Unfortunately, both men, after exhausting all other means, have just agreed to a good old-fashioned duel.
My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
No pistols or clunky sabers, just two long, thin rapiers, strictly designed for piercing flesh and ending disagreements. permanently. One solid fact is that while Henry IV occupied the French throne, there were over 10,000 duels with about a 50% fatality rate. Yeah, I know, imagine that. Now, you can imagine how bad this had to be for PR. As a result, laws supporting duels slowly faded, while restrictions became more prevalent until dueling was outright banned by King Louis XIV in the later half of the 1600s. This, however, did not completely stop men from settling their differences, but it did require more discretion. Since dueling was banned, disagreements were now handled a little differently, especially in crowded cities like Paris, where there were rumors of underground fights and scuffles between all kinds of undesirables. Legends of these half-devil, half-angel Savators found themselves within the stanzas of lengthy poems and on the lips of excited poets. Many of these ruffians fought using a brutal style of street fighting which included punches, grappling, knees, kicks, elbows, and headbutts. While there wasn't any codified system, many simply called it Savate, possibly named after the footwear that many of these street fighters donned. Duels with swords and pistols still occurred, but street fighting carried far less punishment, with both fighters usually walking or at least limping away. In the southern cities of Marseille, Ajaccio, and Toulon, a game was already being developed by French sailors and locals there. This area was quite cosmopolitan, with a motley crew of adventurous sailors, criminals, smugglers, gamblers, and other opportunistic traders of the Mediterranean residing there. There were a few names of this game. Some called it Jeu Marseillais, others called it Juba de Boutique. However, most knew it as Chausson. On the ports and in the view of the public eye, sailors traded high flashy kicks and light slaps. It was fun, fairly safe, and many of these navigators of the high seas also employed unique kicks from the ground. I theorized that this was the lighter version, perfect for good clean fun, with no danger of law enforcement being alerted. I think that a grittier, rougher style, complete with the 11 herbs and spices of punches, elbows, headbutts, eye gouging, knees, and grappling, also existed. This is mainly because when the game was over, and the sailors needed to defend themselves in dire situations such as war, a friendly acrobatic style would have not been enough to keep them alive. The latter part of the 1700s would be marked by many events such as the French Revolution, rise of Napoleon, fall of Saint-Domingue, and a change from a monarchy to a republic. The status quo also changed. Previously, the clergy was at the top, followed by royalty, with the commoner rounding out the bottom. This industrial revolution led to the creation of a new society structure. The old bourgeoisie, bankers, lawyers, and other highly educated men with political influence, were at the top of the French food chain now. Directly under them was the petite bourgeoisie, businessmen, artists, authors, and civil servants, and educators. Then there were the cadres, office workers, and other officials. Finally, the working class, previously laboring on farms, now making a living in factories and construction. This will lead to the La Belle Époque, a period of economic prosperity, technological innovation, and a rise in the appreciation and development of the French fine arts. Let's begin by looking at how Savate left the streets and broke into the training halls, undergoing a huge evolution and drastic change to its image. Michel Cassou, also known as Pissaux, an avid salvateur who decided to make an earnest attempt to codify and formalize the street fighting style, mostly used by the ruffians in the streets, into an official art. Savate had an extremely low reputation among the higher class elite. Many of the criminals would employ these techniques when fighting each other, but also when fighting others not trained in the art, especially during criminal activities such as muggings. Fighting was just not seen as gentlemanly, nor was it encouraged in highly social circles. Pissaux adopted the various street fighting techniques that he observed and also used. He also added baton and cane fencing to the curriculum. By that time, carrying around a baton or a cane was more socially acceptable than lugging around a long rapier. Fencing was still taught, so slightly tweaking the techniques to the cane was natural. Rather than teaching brutal teeth-extracting punches, Pissaux's style emphasized slaps and palm strikes known as le pont. The hands were also kept lower with the goal of protecting the lower half of the body, with roughly 15 kicks, many of them which were aimed at the torso. Drawing upon the footwork found in fencing, Michel also added a few lunges and retreats. Michel's efforts would not go unnoticed at his salle or training hall drew the attention of many of the elite players in Parisian society such as Lord Henry Seymour, Duke of Orleans, and Paul Gavarni. Michel must have been doing something right, because more and more members of France's higher class started to partake what was previously seen as the lower class fighting style of gutter trash. There were various reasons that drew the French elite to Michel's classes, but the two most popular reasons were most likely for self-defense or to just try out this newer fighting style in gymnasiums versus on the backstreet alleyways. Finally, Michel would name his art L'Art du Savate, or the Art of Savate. Michel would go on to train many students, but the two most important ones we should definitely take note of are Jean Lecour and Julien Leclerc. Julien was an excellent fencer and even more talented saboteur. His skill would actually place him in the line to be the successor of the Michel Chausson method. As training became more public, students would learn from talented fighters and open up their own sales or training halls. Leclerc would really focus on the self-defense aspects of Savate. As we continue, we'll learn that he was responsible for the preservation of Savate. This was not without innovation, but Julien was quite serious in the separation of techniques meant in practice or the ring style versus self-defense situations. He notes in his book, high kicks are blows used exclusively for assault. In combat, on the street, I advise not to employ high kicks. One should employ the low kicks, such as the coup de pied, the punch, and fist blows. At that time, when the Savate sparring style was quite identical to fencing, the two saboteur moved around each other, poking, until one of them made a clean hit. He would say, "Tosh," and the action would stop. Both fighters would reset, and the action would begin after an en garde. Leclerc knew that this would only build bad habits in the streets, so he was a proponent of a safe but more adaptive style that one could use while walking down the streets at night. Jean-Antoine Charles Lecour, the other half of Michel Cassau's dynamic duo. While he wasn't the number one student, he was what many considered a prodigy, and around 10 years later, he would open his own cell, developing one of the most famous newer styles of Savate. But exactly how did this occur? Well, the British and French have always enjoyed a long rivalry that has extended from their military all the way to their cuisine. In fact, if it wasn't for the French, who knows if there would have been the United States of America. There was also a rivalry between fighting styles. On the other side of the English Channel, bare-knuckled boxing reigned supreme. Enter Owen Little Wonder Smith, a dangerous and fairly well-known bare-knuckle boxer. Charles had observed a bout between Swift and Jack Idams, another bare-knuckle boxer who was also visiting France around that time. Impressed by the English boxing display of pugilism, Lecour found himself in a quote-unquote friendly match with Swift. This shows you how much of a pair Lecour had on him, considering that Owen had already sent two men to an early grave in previous bouts. In fact, after this friendly match with Lecour, destiny would have the English bruiser taking one more life in the ring. Now, Owen wasn't just some brute, but actually quite educated, as he would later publish a book explaining the system of bare-knuckle boxing. Also, his stature wasn't so intimidating, with him weighing around 130 pounds, which is about the size of a super flyweight in boxing rings today. Swift and Lecour would square off, and as a student of the Pissaux method, Lecour quickly realized that there were still many kinks that needed to be worked out because the match did not go as well as planned. While Owen's legs were completely tenderized, Lecour did not escape without injury, suffering a bloodied nose and lip. Lecour would put 2 to 3 years into learning and mastering the footwork and punches of English boxing. It wasn't quite the Savate Boxe that we are familiar with today, instead resembling more of a blend of the vertical punches of bare-knuckle boxing. It was, however, more accepted by the higher members of society, with famous French personalities such as Alexandre Dumas, the author of classics such as The Three Musketeers and Count of Monte Cristo, showering it with praise. At first, the addition of English boxing was not well received around the other styles, but that soon changed, and this is where the moniker Boxe or French boxing was given to the style that Charles Lecour and his brother Hubert developed. Unlike the Pissaux method, Charles was not the one that named his own style. Charles preferred to call it Agrès Parisan. That honor actually goes to Théophile Gautier. In one of Gautier's works, he praises Lecour's innovations and booming popularity by declaring it with quotes such as, "Mr. Charles Lecour has reduced this mobster's fencing, this boxing of the court of miracles to an art. With this art, there are no more nocturnal surprises. You can forget your cane, your pocket pistols, but you never forget your legs or your arms." French boxing is a deep science that requires a lot of coolness, calculation, agility, strength. It's one of the most natural developments of human vigor, a fight without any weapons other than its natural weapons where you cannot be caught off guard. It's safe to say that Gautier was a huge fan of this new style, and so the campaigning began. Charles and his brother Hubert would hold friendly matches in restaurants and music halls in front of large crowds. The other training halls throughout Paris and even France were not at all fans of the newer style, but they couldn't help but notice all the attention, publicity, students, support, and most importantly, money the Lecor brothers were getting. I mean, if the author of the Three Musketeers is campaigning for you, it's pretty much a done deal. That doesn't mean to say that everyone was ready to hop on the Boxe train though. With their name and style firmly established, this would lead to the separation of Savate and Boxe. The elites would flock to this newer polished style while looking down on the slightly older Savate style. Boxe was a new thing, the friendly codified brand. Savate was the old washed up style of has-beens, commoners, and low-class vermin. This resulted in both styles flourishing, sometimes independent of each other, becoming more and more of a family business. Students from both styles would continue the cycle of training and opening their own training halls. Some cross-training did occur, but most stayed loyal to either their Savate or French boxing style. Both styles were becoming more organized and open to the public. And during this time, we saw a large amount of innovators, such as Louis Vigneron, a man colloquially known as a Cannon, who was a master of the older style of Savate, focused heavily on grappling. He was a dangerous fighter, defeating a large number of men, and he was also in excellent shape. His style was adopted by the French military, and even later in prearranged exercises, also adapted from German gyms known as Fort Code. If this isn't similar to the kata found in karate, I don't know what is. Louis was also a natural entertainer, developing a more flashy style of Savate with acrobatics as well as firing a real-life cannon from his shoulder. The 22nd August 1871 would unfortunately be the last time he fired his cannon, as a miscalculation with the powder would lead to his demise. His student, Joseph Pierre Chausson, would later become one of the most influential people in the development of French boxing. He was first introduced to Chausson while on military assignment in French Algeria. Upon returning from overseas, Joe would meet Louis Vigneron as well as the Lecor brothers. After watching and training with them, the Cannon man would take Chausson under his wing and began personally supervising his further training. Joe was such a talented fighter that he actually beat up Hubert Lecor, earning the respect of the older Lecor brother. Joseph would continue to refine Vigneron's style, combining it with the formalized Lecor style, all while mastering the cane. Joseph Pierre would also follow in his teacher's footsteps by teaching the armed forces. He'd also write a book on the fighting style known as the Boxe, which was published in 1899. His son Charles would grow into a strong competitor and move French boxing closer into the ring sport style most of us are familiar with today. When we look at the old school videos of Savate, he's easily the most recognized person in the films. Finally, Jean-Joseph Renaud would notice the gravitation towards the safer ring sport versions of Savate and Boxe. However, crime was on the rise in the early 1900s. Savate had become so popular, but Renaud also noticed the higher demand for a more street-savvy self-defense style that he aptly named La Défense dans la Rue, using the Lecor style as its base. Boxing, jiu-jitsu, lutte parisone, and other arts were combined with the dirty tactics of the Apache, a rising criminal entity on the streets of Paris and other parts of Europe. He also placed a larger focus on weapons, including but not limited to the cane, baton, umbrella, pistol, as well as using clothes known as la planche. These two different views of Savate and Boxe would continue to create rifts between the more codified style and a traditional street fighting style. Over 6 million Frenchmen who fought in the Great War suffered casualties. 21 years later, over 500,000 more Frenchmen would lose their lives in World War II. Between wars, Savate was featured in the Olympics, but it would slowly start to fade. A few Salvatore were still training, and by the 1960s, there would begin a resurgence and revival of sorts. Around the early 70s, Savate and Boxe would openly do more cross-training, and in 1985, the newly formed Federation of International Boxe and Savate would officially create a venue for both the ring style and the more traditional academic style. The sport of Savate and Boxe would become even more organized by the 2000s. If you can still remember the game from Chausson, it would later resurface as Chausson in 2007, with a few adjustments. And so this ends another video on the history of another martial art. For me, this was interesting because with Kudo and Yoyan, we saw a lot of adaptation and borrowing from outside martial arts. With the exception of boxing, Savate was more of an influencer. It combined arts mostly from France into what it is today, and spread through the sailors and former military training to distance itself far beyond the Pyrenees. The pretentious idea that all martial arts come from China or India is cringe, and for a lack of a better term, insulting. Eastern martial arts are awesome and introduce cultures and ideas to people who normally would have never experienced them. But thanks to researchers, we've actually seen more examples of Savate gifting other arts with his kicks and acrobatics. Savate went through a huge evolution of combinations, separations, and for the most part reuniting again. A huge thanks goes out to YouTube channels like Professor Bouton of the Bouton Academy, London, Savate, Historia Pugnaram, Savate Academy Australia, and Kenepua. And I would also like to personally thank my friend Anthony for his help with the French pronunciation and Savate terms. And finally, a huge thanks goes to viewers like you. This channel has shifted more into the martial arts realm from Tekken videos, and my goal is to highlight the martial arts in video games and connect the two groups. Some of you love the martial arts and others love Tekken. And I think we all can have our cake and eat it too, at least on this channel. But for now, thanks for watching. God bless. Feng Wei. Out.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man? Bro, I'm out, man. That nigga's tripping.